Coming up on today's Philadelphia Eagles now, an Eagles roster projection after Eagles OTAs, after the NFL draft, and after the heat of NFL free agency. Who makes this roster and who is out, especially when you consider some of the players who did perform well during Eagles OTAs, which of course we'll talk about here on the show as well. Before we begin though, if you think the Eagles have the best roster in the NFL, I want you to hit that thumbs up icon and like the video. If not, explain to me why down in the comment section. Let's begin at that quarterback position. Last year, heading into 2022, the Eagles only had two quarterbacks on that opening 53-man roster. It was Jalen Hurts and Gardner Minshew. I think because the Eagles are so stacked at other positions, once again, they're going to go with two quarterbacks on the opening day roster, and then on the practice squad, they're going to want a quarterback or two. Could it be Tanner McKee out of Stanford, who they drafted late, or could it be Ian Book? In my opinion, I think Tanner McKee is the better quarterback who's done a little bit more as a passer at the college level. Of course, we don't know what he can do at the NFL level just yet. I just have questions about who Ian Book can be as a passer in this league. And right now, that's why I think that Tanner McKee is QB3 for me, in my opinion. To the backfield, running backs. Last year, the Eagles had three on the opening 53-man roster. I think they go four here because I like all of these backs, frankly. DeAndre Swift, Rashaad Penny, Kenneth Gainwell are all going to split carries here. And as you look at this Eagles running back depth chart, Boston Scott is, of course, going to be in the mix as well. But if you disagree with me that the Eagles are going to have four backs on this opening 53, who are you cutting here? Because I'm not cutting DeAndre Swift, Kenneth Gainwell, Rashaad Penny, or Boston Scott, because individually, I think they are all very, very important. So this is going to be a difficult roster decision to make. When you think about what the Eagles did a year ago in holding three running backs, they did become a more pass-happy offense last year. But I think it's going to be a complementary offense once again here this year. I'm interested to see what happens, and that would mean that Trey Sermon is on the outside looking in. To wide receiver now. Couple of players are obviously really, really safe. And A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith, Quez Watkins and Olamide Zaccheaus, I believe are also going to make this team. The big looming question, who's wide receiver 3, who's wide receiver 4? To have that problem is a good thing because both of them are really good players. And then at wide receiver 5, how about Devon Allen? Impressed a little bit last year, caught that long touchdown pass in that preseason game against the Cleveland Browns. I think he offers this team value as a returner, as a special teamer, as a speed threat, and he makes this team. So this Eagles wide receiver depth chart, they are deep at this position. Quez Watkins has impressed Nick Sirianni more so than any player so far this offseason. So that's notable. I think that Olamide Zaccheaus is the wide receiver 3 as of right now. The Eagles disagree with me, though, because Quez Watkins is getting those wide receiver 3 reps. Now let's shift gears to tight end. Tight end is also a sneaky good position battle for depth purposes. Dallas Goedert, by far and away, going to be the go-to tight end for this team. But what happens after Goedert? Grant Calcaterra, Jack Stoll, Tyree Jackson. Tyree Jackson is an athletic freak who's popped at practices, tore his ACL 2 years ago, came back late last year, and a lot of people are bullish on his ability. If you let him go, he's going to sign with a different team, and I think the Eagles really do like his potential. They also drafted Grant Calcaterra, who's bulked up this offseason. Jack Stoll is very reliable as a blocker. So I think the Eagles actually go 4 tight ends for the 53. And on the outside looking in is one of their free agent acquisitions from this past year in Dan Arnold, who is considered to be more of a blocking tight end. The Eagles did keep 3 tight ends last year as well. So my early predictions, they go with an extra player with a couple of these roster spots. Lastly, offensively, you look at the offensive line here. As starters, I think the Eagles have the best offensive line in football still. From left to right, you're going to go Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, who had a great quote this past week. He said, you can either punch people or get punched. I like punching people. Jason Kelce, Cam Jurgens, Lane Johnson. That is your starting offensive line on the left side of your screen, at least as of right now, as Jurgens is getting those reps at right guard. And then the backups. This is going to be a very good backup battle Brett Toth, Sua Opeta, Tyler Steen, Tyrese Robinson, and Roderick Johnson. Robinson and Johnson are kind of battling it out for the backup tackle spots. Tyler Steen, backup right guard. You drafted him in the 3rd round. If he doesn't make the opening 53, that's kind of a disaster. And then Sua Opeta, Brett Toth, quality backups here. You also have a guy like Jack Driscoll, who is surprisingly on the outside looking in for me on this Eagles roster projection. I certainly could be wrong. I do think this is the best offensive line in football. There are depth concerns, though, with this team. Because if one of the starters does get hurt, I'm a little bit worried about where the depth could stand. But you have Jeff Stoutland, the best offensive line coach in football. So we're about to shift to the defensive side of the ball. Which unit is better, though? Is it the offense? Is it the defense? You tell me. And I'll tell you about BetUS, the best sportsbook in the game. 125% deposit bonus at chatsports.com/EaglesBet. Using that promo code here to my right, Eagles125. You put in $100, you get $125 back on that deposit. NBA Finals MVP odds. Good series so far. Nikola Jokic -750. Jimmy Butler +750. So pretty even there. Jamal Murray, 16-1 odds. Get ahead of that value right now. I would like to do that if the Nuggets win. Bam Adebayo, Gabe Vincent also in the mix. Let's talk about the defense now. Defensive line on our roster projection. Another very deep positional group here for Philadelphia. Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, Jordan Davis, Josh Sweat. That is going to be your starting defensive line. You have Derek Barnett, who didn't partake in OTAs this week, but was on the side field and did warm up with this team as he recovers from that torn ACL that he suffered in week 1 against the Lions last year. Jalen Carter, Moro Ojomo is a player who I do think makes the team. Milton Williams is a backup defensive tackle. He really came on at the end of last year. Kentavious Street. Kentavious Street is a player who I think is going to catch a lot of people by surprise. He's been productive for San Francisco and the New Orleans Saints. Kind of fell under the radar with how busy the Eagles were in free agency. That is 9 total defensive linemen for the Eagles. And their defensive line, it is great, man. This is a deep unit with a lot of high-level talent. Brandon Graham, 11 sacks last year. Fletcher Cox had 7. Jordan Davis looking a little bit slimmed up. 6'6", 340. He can move a mountain. Josh Sweat, 11 sacks last year. Hassan Reddick, 18.5 combined in the regular season and in the playoffs. Kind of that Sam linebacker, but if he's dropping back in coverage, you're doing yourself a disservice. That's why I kind of count him as a defensive lineman here. Derek Barnett, Jalen Carter, Milton Williams, Janarius Robinson, or Kentavious Street. It's kind of a good roster battle. I'm going Street here. And then Nolan Smith making the squad as well. A trade candidate, and then a backup battle. That's what I want to talk about next year. The backup battle here will be great between a couple of players. We're talking Janarius Robinson. We're talking Kentavious Street. Also, Marlon Tupolutu is a good player who the Eagles drafted a couple of years ago, who prior to getting hurt at the start of last year was actually playing pretty well, had a good preseason, had a good training camp. Other teams are going to be needy for some defensive line help. That's where he could come in as a trade candidate to maybe get a late pick back in the 2024 NFL draft. So a couple of roster battles here as far as depth positions go. That's what we're going to keep an eye on with training camp a few weeks away. Let's now go to linebacker. Hassan Reddick, just under the definition of him being a Sam backer, makes the squad, of course, but we'll put him in at the linebacker spot. Nakobe Dean, Nicholas Morrow, those are your 2 starting backers there. Nakobe Dean, Nicholas Morrow. Nolan Smith, of course, going to make the squad. Sean Bradley as a very good special teamer. Shout out to Temple. Christian Ellis. Let's spend a few moments talking about him because I have Patrick Johnson making the team, and at 7 total linebackers here. Christian Ellis may have impressed more so than any other player throughout Eagles OTAs. Had a couple of interceptions. He was really, really active. And with TJ Edwards and Kaiser White moving on, you do have a need for some depth at that linebacker position. And Christian Ellis is a guy who's been turning a lot of heads. Feel free to chop it up with me on Twitter and Instagram. I see Brandon Ford in the chat here during our live show. He's a person who chops it up with me a ton, and you can do the same. Slide in the DMs. Say what's up. You want to talk birds, talk life, talk NFL, NBA, college football, health, wellness, life. I do it all at Chase_Senior on Twitter and Instagram. Secondary now. Eagles are also deep here, and that's really a big theme of what we've been discussing. This is a deep football team, and that's why I like their prospects of making another deep run in the playoffs and being a Super Bowl contender. Darius Slay, James Bradbury, your top two corners. Avonte Maddox in the slot. Terrell Edmonds, Reed Blankenship, your starting safeties. Sidney Brown, the third-round pick, will be a depth safety. Justin Evans, barely making this roster by the skin of his teeth. Greedy Williams and Zech McPherson as a couple of your backup cornerbacks. Josiah Scott maybe to the practice squad. A couple of those other guys on the periphery of that roster, like Akili Ringo, they might go on the practice squad as well. I found it really, really difficult without being able to really know what some of these players are doing, because we can't see these preseason games to see and determine who's going to make the team. So that's 9 total defensive backs there. And this is when going back to what I was talking about earlier about holding on to an extra tight end, holding on to an extra running back might cost me in the accuracy of my roster projection, but it is June. And you might be looking at this saying, well, Kevon Wallace, he didn't miss a tackle last year. He could play special teams, and he's a pretty good backup. How about him as a trade candidate as well? So Marlon Tuipulotu and then Kevon Wallace as some trade candidates to net some draft capital back. Specialists are also people too. Rick Lovato, very good long snapper. Aaron Sipas, he is your punter. He's going to be competing with Ty Zentner, the rookie UDFA out of Kansas State, and then Jake Elliott, coming off a really good season as one of the best kickers in the NFL, rounds out the opening roster projection for me for this football team. Grade the roster projection and let me know what you think of it. A, B, C, D, or F. If you want to call me a fraud and say that you hate me, that's fine. Either way, just let us know.